"Hey, Blackie, go serve." The words didn't slip. They cut. Sharp, loud, cruel enough to slice through the polished air of the ballroom. It was supposed to be a night of elegance, chandeliers glowing like frozen constellations, violins whispering in the background, silverware catching the light. But in that one instant, the room froze around a single sentence. At the center stood her, a young black woman in a simple black dress, phone pressed to her ear, eyes steady. She wasn't laughing, wasn't breaking, she just stood anchored, letting their laughter bounce off marble walls like cheap glass. Across from her, a billionaire family huddled together in satin and tuxedos, perfect smiles, champagne in hand, their arrogance dripping louder than the orchestra. A blonde matriarch, face painted with the confidence of money, pointed straight at her as if she were nothing more than staff misplaced in a royal hall. The rest of the family leaned in, chuckling, eyes bright with ridicule. "Look at her dress. She doesn't belong here. She probably sneaked in. Security should clear this up." Each word stung not because they were true, but because they were the same words she had heard all her life. At 12, when she was told she didn't look like honors material. At 16, when a shop clerk followed her like she was already guilty. And now, at 20, standing in a hall her father helped finance, the script hadn't changed. She inhaled slowly, her calm deliberate. The phone at her ear wasn't just a shield, it was a bridge. On the other end, her father was listening. "Dad," she whispered, voice low but razor sharp. "You hearing this?" The matriarch laughed louder, proud of her cruelty. "Go serve the drinks, sweetheart. This is no place for you." Her diamond necklace caught the chandelier light, like it wanted to announce her authority to the entire hall. But authority borrowed from wealth is fragile, and tonight it was about to shatter. The daughter didn't flinch, she didn't cry, she simply pressed the phone tighter and let the words flow with the weight of centuries behind them. "Cancel the deal. The $750 million. Cancel it now." A ripple ran through the room. Guests glanced up from their glasses, whispers sparking like static. Someone near the buffet raised a phone, the red light blinking. A journalist in the corner leaned forward, pen frozen mid-note. The billionaire family didn't notice. They kept smiling, still convinced their laughter meant power, still blind to the storm about to break open in the same ballroom they thought they owned. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. Because in that single call, in that single sentence, the ground beneath a $750 empire had already started to crack. The ballroom settled into a fragile silence. The violins played on, but even their strings sounded nervous, like they knew the air had changed. She lowered the phone from her ear, not to end the call, but to let the world see her calm. The billionaire family across the floor kept smirking, whispering as if the joke wasn't over. One man in a sharp tuxedo leaned toward the blonde matriarch. "She's probably a waitress who stole an invite." Laughter followed, brittle but loud enough for half the hall to hear. Guests shifted in their seats. Some sipped champagne quickly, trying not to look. Others stared outright, phones raised discreetly under tablecloths. Every screen was another witness, every eye another mirror. But she did not move. Her stillness was sharper than any reply. They didn't know her name. They didn't know her bloodline. They only saw a black woman in a plain dress and assumed she was invisible. That was their first mistake. At 20, she carried herself with the patience of someone twice her age. Not because she wanted to, but because she had been forced to. She remembered 13 years old, standing in a boutique, clutching her allowance to buy her mother a birthday gift. The clerk had looked her up and down and said, "Sweetheart, nothing here is in your budget." The shame had burned deep. She went home empty, handed that night. Tonight, the memory wasn't shame, it was steel. The blonde matriarch leaned closer, her pearls gleaming like a badge of rank. "Do you even know where you are? This is a gala for deal-makers, not imposters." Her voice was pitched high, cutting across the marble like a gavel. Her daughter's hands didn't shake. Her phone remained steady, and with a voice barely above a whisper, she answered only 2 words. "I know." From the far corner, a journalist scribbled faster. His notebook trembled under the weight of what he was seeing. 2 young women near the buffet traded glances, one biting her lip, the other mouthing, "This is wrong." But the family doubled down. The man in the tuxedo scoffed. If she really belonged, Where's her entourage? Where's the dress, the diamonds, the name tag? His voice dripped with entitlement. He wanted the room to agree. And some did. A low murmur rose, uncertain but dangerous. Injustice never needs proof, only volume. Still, she stood anchored, her silence bending the room toward her. Behind her, the doors to the ballroom opened quietly. A figure entered, unannounced. No spotlight, no announcement. Just the presence of someone who had seen this theater before and knew exactly how it would end. But for now, the daughter held the stage. She didn't need a gown to claim space. She didn't need jewels to reflect the light. She was the storm before it broke. And across from her, a family drunk on arrogance was laughing their way into history's wrong side. The laughter didn't stop. If anything, it grew bolder, feeding off the silence of the crowd. "Security!" the tuxedoed man barked, his voice bouncing off chandeliers. "Get this girl out before she embarrasses herself any further." Two men in dark jackets hired muscle for the evening turned their heads from the doorway. They hesitated. This wasn't a drunken guest or a fight on the dance floor. This was something heavier, and the heir told them so. But the command had been made. They started forward. The blonde matriarch smirked, folding her arms like a queen passing sentence. "See, it's already handled." But nothing was handled. The young woman hadn't moved an inch. She stood there, phone still in hand, gaze locked not on the guards but on the family who thought they owned the room. Around them, the guests shifted uncomfortably. A low hum of whispers filled the ballroom, like bees restless in a hive. One woman in emerald silk whispered to her partner. "She doesn't look afraid." He shook his head slowly. "That's what scares them." The guards approached, steps measured, unsure. And then the moment came. The blonde matriarch snatched the event pass dangling from the daughter's wrist, held it high for all to see, and ripped it clean in two. The sound was sharp, deliberate, almost ceremonial. She let the pieces fall to the floor and said it loud enough for the chandeliers to rattle. "This event is not for people like you." Gasps scattered across the room. Someone near the bar muttered, "She didn't just say that." Another guest, younger, lifted a phone higher, the red light blinking steady. The daughter's jaw tightened, but her posture didn't break. Slowly, she lifted the phone closer to her lips and spoke with a calmness that cut sharper than rage. "Dad, you heard that. Cancel it. Cancel the $750 million. Now." The words weren't shouted, but they carried. The room heard them. The family heard them. And suddenly, the laughter faltered. One of the guards froze mid-step. His eyes darted between the woman giving orders and the young black woman who spoke with the weight of someone not bluffing. The tuxedoed man tried to recover, waving a dismissive hand. "Empty threats. She's bluffing." But it didn't feel like a bluff. Not to the guests. Not to the witnesses whose phones were now aimed squarely at the family. At the edge of the ballroom, a journalist scribbled a line in bold ink. "Billionaire family mocks woman possible heir." His hand trembled, not from doubt but from anticipation. The daughter stood firm, eyes calm, silence louder than every insult. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The storm was already moving in, and everyone could feel it. The billionaire family just didn't know yet they weren't laughing at a guest. They were laughing at the fuse of their own undoing. The torn pass lay on the marble floor, two broken halves that seemed to echo louder than the violins. Guests leaned forward in their chairs, breaths caught somewhere between outrage and disbelief. But in the center of it all, she did not flinch. Her silence was deliberate, her stillness calculated. The guards hovered just steps away, waiting for her to protest, waiting for her to plead. But she offered them nothing. No apology, no explanation, only composure. The tuxedoed man sneered. "See, she has nothing to say." Guilty silence. But those who were watching closely knew better. They saw her hands steady. They saw her breathing measured. This wasn't fear. It was restraint. She raised her eyes slowly, meeting the matriarch's cold stare without a single word. The pause stretched, heavy, unbearable for those who thrived on dominance. Silence, to them, felt like defiance. The matriarch's smirk faltered just for a second. "What? Nothing to add? No excuses?" Still nothing. Somewhere near the back, a young man whispered to his friend, "Why isn't she fighting back?" The friend shook his head. "She's waiting. For what? I don't know." But she knew. She remembered being 16, accused of shoplifting because a bracelet was missing from a counter she hadn't even touched. She remembered how her mother told her afterward, "Sometimes silence is sharper than any defense. Let them dig their own grave with their words." Tonight, those words lived in her bones. She bent down not to pick up the shredded pass, but to lift her phone again. With the calm precision of someone setting a trap, she whispered, "They just tore my pass, Dad, and they said I don't belong." Gasps rippled through the crowd again. The billionaire family exchanged nervous glances, though they masked it with forced laughter. The tuxedoed man clapped his hands once, sarcastic. "Bravo. She's playing victim now. Classic move." But his voice cracked ever so slightly, and the guests noticed. The guards shifted uneasily. One muttered under his breath, "This doesn't feel right." The other glanced at the raised phones around the hall, realizing every second was being captured. And still she said nothing more. Her silence pressed harder against the family than any argument could. Every insult they threw landed flat against the wall of her composure. Every laugh they forced sounded more desperate than the last. The room had turned. It was no longer about a girl in a plain dress. It was about what her silence revealed. That power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it watches. Sometimes it lets arrogance burn itself alive. She stood there, anchored, calm, unyielding, while the family across from her unraveled word by word. The storm was gathering, and she didn't need to lift a finger. It started with a whisper, but in a room full of ears, whispers never stay quiet for long. Near the bar, a journalist lowered his glass and raised his pen, scribbling faster than the violins could play. His headline was already writing itself. "Billionaire family mocks black woman at gala." Beside him, a young woman in emerald silk pressed her phone against her chest. "I can't believe they just tore her pass," she muttered. Her date frowned. "Careful," he said, "they're powerful." She shook her head slowly, eyes never leaving the center of the room. "Not tonight, they're not." And then the glow began small red recording lights, blinking like warning signals across the hall. A guest at the buffet lifted his phone discreetly. Another angled hers from a balcony. A murmur rolled through the crowd, half outrage, half anticipation. The tuxedoed man noticed and snapped, "Turn those off. This is private business." His voice cracked on the last word. The journalist didn't lower his pen. The phones didn't lower either. And from the back, a voice cut the air, soft but steady. "She hasn't done anything wrong." Heads turned. A young intern, barely 22, stood trembling near the coat check. His name tag still crooked from rushing into the gala. His voice shook, but his conviction didn't. "She walked in with a pass. I saw her. She belongs here." The room inhaled. The matriarch laughed, sharp and brittle. "You think anyone will believe a nobody like you?" But the intern didn't back down. "Maybe not me, but all of them will." He gestured toward the raised phones, the blinking red lights now multiplying across the room. Guests shifted again, the balance tilting. And then came another voice, this time from the second row of tables. An older woman with silver hair and a gown that whispered old money stood, her tone calm but cutting. "I heard what you said, every word." She looked at the matriarch without blinking. It was shameful. Silence deepened, the kind of silence that made chandeliers feel heavy. The daughter still hadn't moved. Her phone was steady in her hand, her eyes fixed, her breathing even. She let the witnesses do what she knew they would, speak. Because silence invites others to fill the void, and when truth fills it, lies collapse. The tuxedoed man tried again, voice harsher now. "She's manipulating you. None of this is real." But the journalist spoke up, his voice firm. "It's real. I've covered mergers for 10 years, and I know the weight of 750 million when it trembles, and it's trembling tonight." The crowd rippled with murmurs. Outrage was no longer silent. The billionaire family shifted, faces tight, eyes darting. They had walked into the gala thinking they owned the night, but now the night was turning against them, and in the center of it all, the daughter remained still, as if rooted into the marble itself, letting every witness, every voice, every lens build the storm around her. The air was shifting, tilting against the family. They felt it, and panic, when it wears a suit, always disguises itself as louder arrogance. The tuxedoed man slammed his glass on the nearest table, liquid splashing onto linen. "Enough of this circus," he barked. "Security, remove her, now." The guards hesitated again. eyes darting between the family's commands and the raised phones circling the room like silent witnesses. The blonde matriarch's voice cut sharper. "What are you waiting for? She's trespassing. She's a fraud. Get her out before this goes any further." Her words rattled like a gavel in a courtroom no one trusted. Gasps rippled through the hall. People weren't whispering anymore. A young man near the buffet muttered loud enough for half the row to hear. "Fraud?" She showed her pass. Another voice joined in, a woman clutching a glass of champagne. "They ripped it. We saw it." But the family wasn't listening. They leaned in closer, surrounding her with their words like knives. "You don't belong here. You're humiliating yourself. Take her outside. This event is for real players." The guards took another step forward, uneasy but obedient. Their shadows stretched across the marble floor, closing in. Still, she didn't move. The daughter stood anchored, phone in her hand, eyes steady. Her silence was no longer restraint, it was defiance carved in stone, and the silence forced the family to fill it with venom. The matriarch leaned close, venom dripping in every syllable. "Girls like you only get in by lying, by pretending, and tonight everyone will see it." Phones blinked red, pens scratched faster, witnesses leaned closer. The daughter finally tilted her head, not to speak to them, but to her phone. Her voice was low, measured, every word deliberate. "Dad, they just called me a fraud." The tuxedoed man laughed, too loud, too sharp. "Tell your imaginary daddy to send you home." But the joke didn't land. Not in this room, not with the silence that followed. One of the guards cleared his throat, uneasy. "Ma'am," he muttered to the matriarch, "maybe we should verify first." "Verify?" she snapped, eyes blazing. "I don't need verification to know what doesn't belong in my presence." The intern near the coat check raised his voice again, braver now. "She does belong. I saw her name on the list." The matriarch whipped her head toward him, venom dripping. "And you'll lose your job for that little stunt." But the threat sounded hollow. The crowd wasn't with her anymore. The daughter remained still, her silence now echoing louder than the insults. She didn't argue, didn't plead. She let their rage draw the noose tighter around their own reputations. And as the guards finally reached her, the entire ballroom held its breath. Phones lifted higher, witnesses leaned forward. Because everyone knew what happened in the next moment would not just decide her place in the gala, it would decide who truly belonged in power. The room was holding its breath. Every chandelier crystal, every polished glass, every phone raised in the air seemed to wait for the next move. The guards stood inches from her now. One extended a hand, not yet touching, but close enough to claim authority. The daughter's shoulders didn't twitch. Her stillness turned the marble beneath her feet into bedrock. That was when the matriarch snapped. With a sudden jerk, she leaned forward, snatched the daughter's phone clean from her hand, and held it high like stolen treasure. The gasp that followed was louder than the orchestra's opening note. "This," the matriarch spat, "is what pretenders use. Tricks, little performances for attention." She waved the phone in the air, her pearls trembling with the movement. Not real power, not real status. The tuxedoed man clapped once, mock applause. "Bravo! She can't even stand without a prop. Call it what it is, fraud." The guards shifted uncomfortably. One whispered, "Ma'am, that's her property." "Silence!" The matriarch cut him off, glaring as if her stare alone could terminate employment. And then, with a cold smile, she did what no one expected. She hurled the phone to the marble floor. The crack echoed like a gunshot through the hall. The screen splintered, shards scattering under the chandeliers. The crowd erupted. Guests gasped, shouted. Some stepped forward but stopped themselves, torn between instinct and etiquette. Phones captured every angle, red lights flashing like alarms. The daughter lowered her gaze, not in defeat, but in calm calculation. She bent slowly, gathered the broken device in her hands, and brushed the glass dust from her dress. When she stood again, her eyes weren't on the matriarch. They were on the witnesses. And the witnesses saw it. She didn't yell. She didn't fight. Her silence was louder than the shattering phone at her feet. The matriarch, drunk on her own cruelty, sneered. There. Now she's got nothing. No invitation. No proof. No voice. But the journalist near the bar muttered into his recorder, "Correction. She has every voice in this room but theirs." From the buffet, a guest shouted, "That's destruction of property." Another chimed in, "This is abuse." The family tried to drown it out with laughter, but their voices cracked under the weight of outrage. The daughter tilted her head, serene, as if the storm hadn't touched her. And with the broken phone still in her hand, she whispered just loud enough, "They think they silenced me, Dad." But the whole world just heard them. The matriarch froze, color draining for the first time. The tuxedoed man frowned, realizing too late what every guest already knew: silence doesn't erase injustice. It amplifies it. And in that ballroom, filled with gasps, blinking phones, and witnesses leaning forward in disbelief, the family had crossed the final line. They thought they had broken her. Instead, they had broken themselves. The shards of glass still glittered at her feet when the ballroom doors opened again. No fanfare, no announcement, just the unmistakable weight of presence. He walked in with the calm of someone who had already seen the ending. A tailored black suit, no tie, silver at his temples, eyes sharp enough to slice through the smoke of arrogance still hanging in the air. The whispers rippled instantly. "Is that?" "It can't be." "That's Carter." The billionaire family stiffened. Their smirks faltered, but not enough to admit fear. Not yet. The black CEO didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He stepped through the crowd, and the crowd parted, instinctively, like water making way for a ship. His gaze never left his daughter, standing calm in the center with a broken phone in her hand. He stopped beside her, rested one hand gently on her shoulder, then lifted his eyes to the family across the marble floor. "You tore her pass," he said quietly. "You broke her phone. You mocked her existence." A pause, heavy enough to silence the entire orchestra. "You just mocked the wrong daughter." Gasps rippled again. The matriarch tried to recover, her pearls trembling. "This has nothing to do with you. She was trespassing," but his voice cut like a blade through velvet. "She had a pass. She had proof. You destroyed both. That doesn't erase them. It condemns you." Then he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a sleek device, and pressed a single button. Across the ballroom, 3 assistants in dark suits appeared, almost as if summoned from the walls themselves. One handed him a tablet. He tapped once, then handed it back. "Protocol 7, he said calmly. The assistants moved with precision. Laptops unfolded. Calls dialed. Within seconds, the hum of technology layered itself over the anxious air. What are they doing?" the tuxedoed man muttered, his voice cracking. The CEO turned to his daughter, speaking just loud enough for the crowd. "Every word they spoke is logged. Every action recorded. The deal is under immediate review." The journalists scribbled faster. Phones tilted higher. The room was now a courtroom, and every witness a juror. The matriarch tried again, desperation slipping through her tone. "You can't do this here. Not in public." But his eyes locked on hers, unflinching. "You humiliated my daughter in public. The correction will be public too." The family went silent. The CEO nodded once to his daughter. She raised the shattered phone slightly, as if presenting evidence to the court of witnesses. And though it was cracked, useless to the naked eye, it was enough. Because everyone in the room already knew. The real recording wasn't in her phone, it was in theirs. And the tide had officially turned. The ballroom was silent except for the scratching of pens and the faint hum of phones recording. Every guest leaned forward as if gravity itself had shifted toward the center of the room. The black CEO stood tall, his hands still resting on his daughter's shoulder. His voice came low, steady, carrying further than any shout. "You asked who she is," he said, eyes locked on the family. "You laughed as if she were invisible. You called her a fraud." He paused, letting the silence hang like a verdict. "She is my daughter. And more than that, she is the rightful heir to the very deal you came here to secure." The words cracked across the hall like thunder. The tuxedoed man's smile collapsed. The matriarch's pearls shifted as her chest rose and fell too quickly. For the first time that night, the billionaire family had no rehearsed lines, no easy arrogance. "She's the successor," the CEO continued, his voice sharpening. "Her name is already on the documents. She is part of the controlling trust. The $750 million deal you were celebrating? You insulted one of its authors." Gasps spread like fire through the crowd. Guests began murmuring, some in outrage, others in awe. A woman in the second row whispered, "She's not just his daughter. She's in the deal." Her companion nodded, phone camera zoomed in, capturing every stunned expression from the family. The matriarch tried to recover, her voice faltering. "That's impossible. We weren't told." The CEO cut her off, his tone razor sharp. "You weren't told because arrogance doesn't deserve forewarning. You assumed her silence was weakness. You assumed her presence was intrusion. That was your mistake." His daughter stood taller now, not needing to speak. Her calm was a mirror of his authority, her silence the proof of her place. Across the hall, the journalist whispered into his recorder, "This isn't just a scandal. This is history." "Hi." One of the guards stepped back, lowering his head, ashamed to have been part of the charade. The intern by the coat check whispered, almost in disbelief, "She was the deal all along." The CEO turned slightly, his eyes sweeping across the witnesses. "You saw it. You all saw how quickly they stripped away dignity, how easily they tore her proof, broke her phone, and mocked her existence. This is what prejudice looks like. This is what it costs." Then he faced the family again, voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "And tonight, it will cost you everything." The words sank deep, undeniable, echoing in a room that had transformed from gala to reckoning. The daughter's eyes met her father's for a brief moment. No words passed between them. None were needed. The truth was already on the table. And the family who thought they owned the night now stood exposed, trembling in a ballroom that no longer belonged to them. The revelation detonated in the ballroom like a silent explosion. It left no smoke, no flames, just wide eyes, open mouths, and the sound of reputations collapsing. The tuxedoed man staggered back a step, his jaw tight but his knees unsteady. His glass, forgotten on the table, tipped over and spilled red wine across white linen like a spreading wound. The matriarch gripped her pearls as if they could anchor her, but they rattled against her chest with every tremor of panic. Her carefully painted smile cracked at the edges. She scanned the room, desperate for an ally, but saw only phones raised higher and faces staring back coldly. The guards froze. One rubbed his hands together, suddenly pale, and muttered under his breath, "God, what did we just do?" The other took a full step back, eyes downcast, ashamed to meet the daughter's steady gaze. The event coordinator, flustered in his bow tie, hurried forward, whispering frantically to the family. "We had no idea. Please, this is spiraling." "Spiraling?" The CEO's voice cut him off like a blade through velvet. "This is correction." The coordinator's face drained of color. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a chair, realizing he'd hitched his career to the wrong side of the storm. Guests filled the silence with their own outrage. "She had a pass. I saw it. They ripped it themselves. And they broke her phone. This is going viral already. Look at the comments." The journalist at the bar slammed his notebook shut and looked directly at the family. "You've destroyed your own deal. This story will be global by morning." The matriarch shook her head violently, denial louder than reason. "No, this isn't how it works. We're the Bennetts." Her words were drowned by a rising tide of whispers. Guests weren't just observers anymore, they were jurors, sentencing with their phones, with their voices, with their refusal to look away. The daughter stood motionless, broken phone still in her hand like a relic of the injustice they had tried to bury. She didn't need to speak. The witnesses had taken her silence and turned it into an indictment. And the family, once untouchable, once laughing, stood caged in their own arrogance, trapped not by walls, but by truth. The CEO's eyes swept the room one more time, catching the gaze of every trembling guard, every stunned guest, every shaking staff member. His voice was calm, but each word landed like a gavel. "You all saw it, the humiliation, the cruelty, the arrogance, and now you see what it costs." No one dared interrupt. No one dared move. The family looked around, searching for a lifeline, but found none. The storm had turned, and the crowd, once silent, was now the sea that would drown them. The weight of silence pressed harder than the chandeliers above. Every guest could feel it. Something final was about to fall. The black CEO lifted his tablet from the assistant's hands. His thumb hovered for only a second, then tapped once. A soft chime echoed through the speakers hidden in the ballroom walls. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried across marble and velvet, smooth but absolute, "the $750 million agreement we gathered here to seal tonight is terminated." The words detonated. Gasps rippled like thunder through the hall. Glasses clinked against tables. Someone dropped a fork that rang too loud. But nothing drowned out the shock in the family's faces. The tuxedoed man's bravado collapsed into desperation. You can't do that. Months of negotiation, years of groundwork, you can't just cancel. The CEO's eyes cut him down before he finished. I can, and I just did. The matriarch lunged forward, pearls swinging. This is madness. You're ruining everything. No, he interrupted, his tone even sharper. I'm correcting everything. A partnership built on respect cannot include those who know nothing of it. You mocked my daughter in the deal she was born to inherit. That's why your empire ends here. The words landed like a gavel, final and unappealable. Guests broke into murmurs, some shaking their heads in disgust at the family, others nodding in approval. Phones zoomed in, capturing every flicker of panic crossing the Bennetts' faces. The event coordinator staggered forward, whispering frantically, "Please, Mr. Carter, perhaps we can salvage." "Step aside," the CEO said flatly. And the man did, shoulders slumping as though he had aged a decade in one sentence. The daughter stood taller now, her silence still unbroken, but her presence amplified. She didn't need to say a word. Her father's judgment had spoken for them both. One of the guards lowered his head, muttering, "Should have trusted my gut." He stepped back fully, putting distance between himself and the family he'd been ordered to protect. The other followed, ashamed. The tuxedoed man tried one last plea. "Think of the market. Think of the press." The CEO's gaze hardened. "The press is already thinking, and the market knows integrity has more value than numbers. I will not trade dignity for dollars." With a final tap on the tablet, the contract's digital seal blinked red across the screen. Void. Irrevocable. And just like that, the empire they thought untouchable crumbled not over spreadsheets or boardrooms, but in the middle of a ballroom filled with witnesses. The Bennetts weren't just losing a deal. They were losing the illusion that arrogance could shield them. And the world, through every blinking phone and every whispering guest, was already writing the headline. Billionaire family mocked black CEO's daughter lost $750 in minutes. The ballroom had changed. It no longer pulsed with violins or laughter. It hummed with something sharper justice carried on whispers and phone cameras. The Bennetts stood frozen in their evening wear, stripped of the one thing they valued most. Untouchable status. Their pearls, their tuxedos, their champagne flutes, none of it mattered now. All anyone could see was arrogance collapsing in real time. The black CEO turned slowly, sweeping the room with his gaze, not just speaking to the family, but to everyone present and beyond, to every camera already streaming to a watching world. Tonight you witnessed how dignity can be torn up like paper, mocked like a punchline, and shattered like glass. But you also witnessed something else. His hand tightened gently on his daughter's shoulder. You witnessed that dignity, once revealed, cannot be destroyed. Murmurs rose, swelling into something close to applause. Some guests nodded fiercely, others wiped at their eyes, ashamed they hadn't spoken sooner. The matriarch tried to protest, her voice cracking, "This isn't final," but he cut her down with a single look, his tone a scalpel. "Your voice holds no weight here, not anymore." The journalist near the bar whispered into his recorder, "This is the moment. This is the line history will remember." The daughter finally lifted her chin, eyes steady, the shattered phone still in her hand like a relic of survival. She hadn't spoken since the call, hadn't needed to. Her silence was the proof. Her father's words were the echo. Guests broke into applause then, hesitant at first, then rising into a storm. Some stood, clapping. Others filmed, their captions already forming, "Respect over money, justice over arrogance." The Bennetts shrank under the weight of it. They weren't just losing a deal, they were losing their legacy. The CEO stepped closer to them, his final words quiet but carrying like a gavel slamming in the highest court. "You mocked my daughter in the deal she was born to inherit, and that's why your empire ends tonight." The applause thundered, the cameras flashed, and in that ballroom, justice didn't roar, it stood calm, unshakable, undeniable. The deal was gone. The masks were gone. All that remained was truth.